Today's guest on the podcast is Agnes Zsofia Nagy, hails from Hungary but is currently based in Zurich. Now, Agnes has got a long track record in consulting and has been primarily focused on supply chain. And that is a topic that is of great interest to all businesses, or at least most businesses right now, because that is changing very, very dramatically. The costs are rocketing. The whole issue is becoming more complex. It's becoming more, it needs more legislation. There's also sustainable issues. So it's a huge topic and one that actually needs to get at the strategic board level and to have those discussions at that level rather than just leaving it to the operational and implementation piece. So Agnes really talks about the benefits of it. She talks about the challenges facing. She talks about sustainability and how we can be both sustainable and profitable, and how culture plays a big part in having a successful or unsuccessful supply chain. So really encourage you to listen to Agnes. She's a fountain of information and a really, really great person to have on the podcast here. We would appreciate, from the podcast perspective, if you enjoy it, please go and give reviews. That's what gets us to more people, and that's what it's all about. But in the meantime, sit back and listen to Agnes. Agnes, it's great to have you here on the podcast, and thank you so much indeed for giving us your time and a loan of your brain for a short period of time.
Thank you, John, for being here. Thanks a lot for the invitation in the first place.
No, listen, this would be great. I mean, you're originally from Hungary, but currently based in Zurich, although I know that can move around the place a little bit based on your work. But you might, just to give a bit of context, you might just give a little bit of kind of a short history of the how you got to do the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I think in short, the best way to put it, just linking back to what you said, I could be almost anywhere. I did a lot of consulting, originally in the UK, and then moved around different parts of the planet. And basically coming from, more operational industry background and growing up in the field, and then going into consulting and utilizing all that strategic and operative knowledge I gained over the years, then landing in Switzerland for a different consulting job, basically. Now it was the time to start my own company just roughly 18 months ago. So basically that's where I'm at the moment now, flying solo and helping more and more companies again to make sure that they are, sustainable.
Yeah, and it's primarily in the supply chain.
Yes,
area of the business. So, I mean, just looking at it from an overall kind of macro level, I mean, what are the for leaders in supply chain, what are the big challenges facing them now? I know that's kind of a big question, but generally speaking, what are the big challenges that you're coming across that they're facing?
I can definitely give you an answer there. It's basically the whole disruption that everybody is discussing every day, I guess, by now. Even if someone does not work in supply chain, we are flooded with information, right? Container ship got stuck here, or, a raw material or any kind of other packaging material missing from the supply chain. So basically the disruption of the daily life is what they are struggling with. But from a leadership perspective, I have to point out that this leads back to the fact that we discussed a couple of times with my peers, that basically leadership in supply chain hasn't really grown up to be real leadership yet. They link back into operations so frequently, partially asked by the C-level leadership or the board of directors, partially because of their own fault, that sometimes, the strategic context, how they could manage differently, is missing, and therefore the firefighting and the more operative part of that position fails directly. So these are the things that they are facing at the moment. So quite a huge paradigm shift in terms of how much issues they are dealing with on a daily basis, and at the same time how they can cope with becoming a strategic leader instead of an operative leader.
Okay, I want to come back to this question about the kind of strategic leader, operational leader.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the other challenges that you mentioned, what is causing those challenges now that didn't cause them before?
That's a really good question, and I could give you a list of 100 different things. Let's nominate the top three, right, in terms of what happens here. So one of the key reasons behind these issues is practically the fact that the linear setup of supply chains and the globalized supply chains were relying on so extensive and places where they don't have, any kind of control over what's happening in terms of, some of the critical parts of the supply chain, that they really don't have control when things go wrong, right? So that risk management element, as well as the overall oversight of their globalized supply chain, was missing, right? That links back to the fact that, again, we'll talk about how do you really approach that strategic leadership, and what are those key steps that should have been taken earlier, before COVID and before the whole issue with the supply chains have hit, right? So there are so many steps. That's why I could mention 100 steps. There's no reason to mention all of them, because it links directly back to the fact that that risk management and oversight of the global links and connections between what they are doing in the different parts of supply chain were missing.
Yeah.
Right? So that's where we need to get back to.
Okay, so just to come back to the other part of the question, which is the operational and strategic, because my perception is that supply chain has always been viewed very much as an operational piece of work, but you keep banging the drum that we need to be more strategic about that. Now, I understand what you mean by that, but can you just elaborate on that? When we say, we need to be more strategic, what do we need to do differently?
I think it's a really straight thing, at least from my perspective, because I work in supply chain. I've seen this not happening enough. So for me, the most straightforward example would be, when issues hit, for instance, container shortage, right, in the globalized supply chains. Then instead of, chasing containers or chasing, solutions individually from a company perspective, I still lack, that strategic element where company leaders would call each other who are in the same area or in the same industry to take a look at how they can collaborate together to solve the issue, right? So partially the increase of container prices, for instance, which is 500-fold, right, at the moment. Wow. Compared to last year or sort of the year before. Then, the obvious question here is, okay, so what are those root causes that we need to chase, right? Again, from an operative perspective. And then have I seen, a coordinated effort also to take a look at, the shipping companies, or also the others, the 3PLs, 4PLs, the strategic partners they work with, how to really tackle that visibility where the real issues happen, right? And not just 2 months out, 24 months out potentially, right? So there, I don't see that level of strategic collaboration and picking up the phone between different leaders. And that's what I mean by missing strategic leadership.
And I mean, when you look at that, is they don't do it because it's just not the way they've ever done it, or they don't want to share information with potential competitors, or what is the reason they don't do it?
I think it's a combination of both. And one more thing is that as leaders, they are not used to doing these kind of things, right? So if someone has that reflex, mental and leadership reflex to delve into operational issues once they hit, that's kind of the default situation. Right. Then it's really hard to keep your distance and say, okay, I'm not going to delve into the daily nitty-gritty or firefighting. I leave it to my teams, but boy, I'm going to pick up the phone to John or James or Sophia or Angela to get together and take a look at, what we could do together. I
Yeah.
have seen this sometimes from companies. I have some good examples from previous times, 10, 15 years ago, that was legislative change related issue they were facing. But I think the issues are escalating at the moment to a degree that it really needs to come out, how they can change the mindset in supply chain leaderships. And that's why I think it's a good thing that we talk at the moment, because you as a coach and those people in your circles who do this really well, they could really help supply chain leaders to get there.
Yeah. And did I hear you correctly when you said that the pricing has gone up 500-fold in the last 12 months? Did I pick that up correctly?
Yeah, you did. If
What
you want,
what
I can
has
send you
caused
the
that?
articles. Yeah, well, it's so many things, so many different things. It would be just wrong to pick one of them, because this is kind of the domino impact of all the wrong decisions, that we did previously in the last kind of 10 years from, not investing in, sea shipping as an industry, right? And also not investing into elevating those capabilities within the industry, or not investing and not taking care of that risk management element that I mentioned before, or simply just taking a look at the whole lane management and transportation management from a very singular point of view,
Right.
or internal point of view. So I can name so many different things. I think from a global point of view, probably it comes back to everything because of the different.
Because it's an enormous increase, isn't it? I mean, it's a gargantuan increase, and I suppose could that be the catalyst? Because if it's not getting the kind of strategic airspace, that would suggest to me is that maybe the conversation isn't taking place at the right level in the organization. But if there's that sort of increase in cost, could that be the catalyst to actually start having the strategic conversations at board level?
You just hit the nail right in the head, John. Thank you so much. It does. And actually, I'm really happy to see that, because right now what I can see is that people started thinking about, machine learning and AI solutions where they make 3PLs and 4PLs talking with each other, which never happened before because of how they manage the markets, right? Or even better collaboration between bigger corporations who run on similar or the same size of raw material need. So these are really happening, and then this was really one of the catalysts. So you're right there, absolutely. I'm happy to see it. Let's see how far we get.
How it goes, yeah. But we hear talk, certainly when you're looking at it, that we hear talk of kind of circular supply chains becoming much more quite dominant, as opposed to linear supply chains. Maybe you might just explain what that is, but also why that is.
Oh, well, if you ask different people, they will give you different answers in terms of if it's really prominent or getting there or not. What we can say very simply, a linear supply chain takes raw materials from a virgin source and sources that are not regeneratable or not replaceable, uses them for production, and then of course that product or service is being used by the consumers and then thrown away. And basically that concludes the whole value chain that we try to think of, and everything before and after or in between is either not visible or people don't want to see. And the circular supply chain or circular value chain is different in ways that we try to use as much, reusable materials as possible. So try to avoid using virgin materials upfront in production or for the services. Try to utilize it as many times as possible. And, if there's waste along the line, then we try to make value of it, for instance, selling it to another company who could use it. There are so many different examples I could mention, like, one man's waste is another man's treasure, right? That's what we usually say. But you know what? We say it and we just didn't do it enough. So now, again, we see, material exchanges popping up, which were not used for this before, just exchanging virgin material, right? now's the time to use it for good. And then, of course, the life expectancy of the product needs to be with much higher quality and longer use. So the planned obsolescence that we had before needs to go away. And then even after using it and then reusing it many times, then whatever we used in the production of that product we need to be able to recycle, upcycle, or regenerate them right at the end of its life. So that's the difference. And with that said, basically, the energy resources we should use also along the way should be renewable, right? I know it's a tall order, and that's why I said not many people would say to you that there are many circular supply chains, and that's true, that there are not many at the moment, but we need to get there because otherwise we just eat up our planet, quite literally.
Yeah. But you're always going to get the pushback, aren't you? Is because it's this balance between, yes, we want to be sustainable, and yet we need to be profitable.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you help companies navigate that? That's a very, very, high tightrope.
Absolutely. And quite frankly, for those who have been established and then linear for the last 3 decades, it's really difficult, but not impossible. And that's by knowing the full value chain, what they are managing at the moment. You would be surprised how many companies don't know their own value chain, unfortunately, which is a sad factor, but it's improvable. And at the same time, we have also different business models from the linear ones that we can use. It's not just sharing economy, it's also different use of, for instance, previously you might have bought, a light bulb to use in your own home and you bought electricity separately, or we can change it to a model where you buy lighting as a service. Right. And then the relevant materials are being recirculated by someone who's managing the whole cycle. And that's a difference between the two business models. So it's not necessarily, just increasing the cost on finding, different ways, but also finding those ways where that one man's waste, another man's treasure kind of principle helps the companies to stay profitable along the value chain. So that's how we normally get started, at least, and then dig deep into the processes to see.
This is just a perception that I may have, and I don't know whether it's an accurate perception or not, but in terms of supply chain, has there been a trend to outsource supply chain to third parties? And is that trend continuing, or is it reversing?
I would say, we don't need to reverse it. We need to collaborate. So it was a trend. Yes, you're correct. Absolutely. It was a huge trend in the last few decades. And sometimes it went really wrong. Sometimes it went well. What I would say is, where we need to find a different way of working is how we collaborate with these entities. And the fact that, we try to externalize cost from a company perspective does not mean or cannot mean that we don't have oversight and visibility and control over how these partners are working for our own total circular value chain. So that's where the difference is. Of course, being more hands-on versus hands-off, right? That was one of the key selling points of outsourcing and offshoring, at least at the beginning and then even a bit later. I don't think, that being a little bit more hands-on or more in control means that we need to put in a lot of effort. It depends on the level of collaboration between the leadership teams of the two different entities, right, that are in contract, basically, and the different contractual passages and parameters would change a little bit, but in that sense, everybody has the same responsibility in that equation. It's not about, pushing certain things here and there to increase cost. So for me, I think it's a solvable equation, not something that we should point the finger at, let's say.
Yeah, but you can see how if it's third party and it's out here, and then we get into the sustainable thing, it's kind of, that's kind of not my issue. I mean, I'm not saying that that's right, but you can hear people saying, well, we don't deal with it. We just outsource it. We pay a fee and it gets done. how they do it is their business. Does that cause a little bit of that issue?
Absolutely. Little bit, a lot, a lot. If anyone tells you differently, they are lying. It's a
Right.
lot of issues, right? And that's why, I need to get back to my previous notion about collaboration and how well people build up that partnership. Because of course, I would ideally outsource certain processes to not stay on my shoulder as responsibility, but equally, if we have, also governance frameworks in place, like extended producer responsibility, or simply just different legislative requirements along the whole ecosystem, which we need to work on in every single country, by the way, so it's not even there where it should be.
Mm.
Then every single company will find that level of responsibility and their place in the process. So again, I don't think it's something where we should say, okay, it's not my responsibility, then it's out of mind, out of sight, or out of sight, out of mind, sorry. But there will be, consequences for all of the partners involved. And that's where I believe, those who, for instance, have the biggest profit in the value chain from the totality of the processes, that's where I would put a little bit of pressure on those companies to say, okay, we need to bring on the rest of the partners and make sure that they comply. So
Yeah.
that's where I see, a little bit more responsibility, because eventually they reap most of the profit. So they need to feel that, responsibility in terms of how they contract their partners.
Yeah.
And why.
And when you're working with organizations, and I said,
Mhm.
I know from, reading some of the stuff
Yeah.
that you've put together. I mean, it's about,
Mhm.
and you mentioned the volatile shipping costs. We talk about
Yeah.
unreliable, shipping schedules, struggling partners, new legislation, etc., for sustainability. When you go into an organization, how do you go about helping them deal with those challenges?
Different by organization, but in general, what I can say is that the majority of the organizations are really grateful for, first of all, putting clarity into what their knowledge is about circular economy. So most of the time, bringing the whole organization on the same page about knowing what they need to do and where they need to go from a strategic perspective. That's
Mm.
the first step. And then having that value chain mapping in place. I know it's a painful process for many of the organizations. We have so many good tools by now compared to 10, 15 years ago. Boy, when I did that on brown paper, right? I think everybody remembers that brown paper all over the way for everybody who works in supply chain. So yeah, we gone to great length of getting these things done very manually. But now I think we have good enough tools to do it in a fraction of the time, and
Yeah.
it will pay off. And I think, the other element where people usually lack some sort of insight that can help them to build a house with the bricks they already have in place is just to show them which brick belongs to what part of that house.
Right.
So that kind of organization is the third element where I usually
Okay.
help a lot with them.
And when you're going into an organization, and this is kind of touching on something that I work with a lot, is what role does culture play in creating effective supply chain management?
I think it plays a huge role, not because I want to state the importance of culture, but I've seen, globalized supply chains where the culture was so bad that people were just coming and going from the organization. I've seen the same organization pulling their strengths and then culture together and change from that pretty
Mm.
shabby place to being a good place to work for. So I think if I look at those companies that function well, they have a really good, well-established uniform culture in place and uniform standards from the leadership. And that matters a lot, especially in supply chain, because you can have so many different problems and variables flying around that you need to solve on a daily basis, that if you don't have the structure in place and the culture is not uniform, then it's really hard to not slip into turf wars and
Yeah, I
petty
can imagine.
arguments, right?
Yeah, I can well imagine. Agnes, this is it's a fascinating topic, and I think that it's one that I think you're right in a sense that is going to become get more and more kind of sight and on the boardroom agendas, because it's becoming a very critical issue. I said anything that the cost of which goes up 500% is bound to catch somebody's attention. That's for sure and for certain. Great topic, and I love it. But before we wrap up, and you can tell people where they get in touch with you. 2 questions I ask everybody. One is a book that's made an impact upon you. What's the book and what was the impact?
I need to come with Bill Walsh. The score takes care of itself.
The score takes care.
Yeah, the score takes care of itself. I have a sports background with competitive swimming as a child, and Bill Walsh is one of those iconic coaches, NFL coaches, who wrote a book about what he did and how he made his team successful within the league. And quite frankly, at first sight, the book looks like as if it was just for those who are into sports. But reading it with a business eye, I think one can realize quite fast that it has all the strongholds of good leadership, and people can only learn from his practices if they tailor it for themselves. So I use many of his tips that he gave from the book, and it works. So that was the direct benefit.
Well, that's not one I've come across before, so that definitely goes on my list. And I agree. I think there's actually so much in sport that we can transfer into business, and it's very applicable. Second, curious that what I'm curious is daily rituals. If you have them, what they are and how they help you.
I have to say that this might be not a good ritual or anything, but I cook. I do something, either a small dish or a bigger dish, depending on how much time I have. I try to just go into the kitchen and do something, either for myself or for a bigger family around me and friends. This is kind of my meditation.
Is it?
Yeah. So for me, chopping the vegetables and all of this stuff, basically it's zones me out. So it's a daily thing. Why I mentioned this, I could mention sports, because of course I'm a sporty person, but I don't get to do sports every day, unfortunately. 3, 4, maybe 5 times a week, yes, but not every day. But I can cook every day. I have half an hour at least to cook, and that basically helps me to zone out and reevaluate. Sometimes my best ideas come when I cook. Believe it or not.
Yeah, I know. I can well imagine. Just out of curiosity, if you're 3, 4, 5 days you do exercise, what do you do?
Oh, right now I do stand-up paddling.
Oh yeah, I love that.
See, we need to meet up on that, and then I take you up on that word. I'm not competitive, but I like a good full body exercise, and it is a really good exercise for every part of the body. It's for the lung, for the heart, for the muscles. So I can only recommend for people who look for a little bit of unwinding. And hopefully if you have, some body of water around you, then you can go on.
I just when you talk about it, I just saw on the news yesterday that somebody completed, they did stand-up paddleboarding all around the UK, right around the coastline.
Amazing.
I mean, incredible. Absolutely.
Incredible.
Absolutely.
Breathtaking, and quite frankly, breathtaking, not from a sports perspective, but the view. Oh my God, the view around the coastline.
Yeah, must be absolutely extraordinary, but a hell of an achievement, an extraordinary achievement as well. Agnes, this has been fantastic. Where can people reach you? We'll put it all in the show notes, but if they're listening, how can they get in touch with you?
I think the easiest way to get in touch with me is to write on LinkedIn, or just, on LinkedIn, I have my email account, Calendly. They can book me directly there, or, you can take a look at my website, BZLWGmbH. That's what you need to look for, which is a German version of value and long-standing value for companies. It's a complicated German term, and I'm not gonna explain that, but as I registered my company in a German territory, it was better to get that understanding.
Well, it's a great website, and there's some really good information and resources there, so I highly recommend. Agnes, thank you so much for being a guest. It's been an honor to have you and a pleasure to have you. I look forward to having another conversation sometime in the near future.
Likewise, John, really appreciate and thank you for all the great questions. Really had a good time. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.